Welcome back to the God's Kingdom Ministries, all new recording. And today we're going to be interviewing Robert Magnuson, who has an interesting story. He's been one of my friends for a while. And I just got through with my green drink, as you can see. You ever see what a green drink looks like in a green glass on a green screen? You can even see my books right behind me. It's amazing, isn't it? Okay, well, enough for the scientific experiment. This is Robert, and Robert, why don't you start out by telling the people how we met, or where did you first get in contact with me?
Stephen, thanks much for that. It was back a couple years ago in the late 2000s that we started reading some of your blog entries, and then we kind of dropped away for a little bit. And then in 2013, 2014, we began to really start to look at it and started to enjoy it and begin to understand it. Based upon my background, it was some new information, but it was also some old information that was helping put together the pieces of the puzzle. So in 2014, we were in Europe during that time, and as we started to move back to the United States, and Jackie introduced me back and said, "Hey, Robert, look at this entry. Oh yeah, that's really great. That actually makes sense." So as we started to look more, then we saw the conference was in Golden Valley, where my family had a home, and we lived in Golden Valley for a few years. And I was going up to see my mom because it was about that time. So in the summer of 2015, we were able to meet you at the conference, which I think was a Pentecost conference there at the Doubletree.
No, it actually would have been either a Passover or Tabernacles. We haven't had a Pentecost conference in a while, at least not until this year. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that shows how much I still have yet to learn all the seasons.
It's hard to keep them all straight, yeah.
That's right.
Just way too many feast days.
That's right. But then the nice thing was I was able to come back up to Minneapolis in 2016 for a wedding, and we had a great time together. As things just continued to unveil itself, and the issues that I was seeing in the Bible, things that are there that, it's just the incredible depth that the Lord has within the Scripture. I mean, it talks about you have principles, and then you have layer upon layer. And it's just been enjoyable to read your readings, see how the Lord has unveiled things for you, how those things juxtapose themselves with the issues that I saw. I grew up with a lot of Puritan books. I love the Puritans. They were not able to reach the level that we're talking about, but they were leading to that. I mean, they really loved the law. They didn't want to get rid of the law. In fact, that was one of the crucial things that when I was reading you didn't disparage the law, which so many Christians today do. The law is no longer applicable. The law doesn't have any purpose. Christ died on the cross, therefore the law is finished. But there's more to it, as we see throughout. That's God's knowledge. That's what God gave to us. That's how God explains himself to us. And so being able to put those things together and being able to see the broader picture of things, and to really, the best part is the sovereignty of God, which of course when you come out of like I do, out of the Calvinist system, you understand sovereignty. But when you see God's love put together with sovereignty, and you see that the law has not just grace, but forgiveness as well, and that the Lord has a bigger plan than what we learned from the teachers. This was very, very incredible to opening my eyes to the next level of what we need to see.
Now you have a deeper, or you have a legal background yourself, don't you?
Yes, I do. So, I mean, that's another nice thing, but the legal background is also understanding God's versus man's teachings, which of course in law school they don't touch on that at all. So once you get to see it, and you get to see how the law is used, and understanding how the mercy plays such a huge role, and understanding that God has specific ways of viewing cases and how he handles it and how he judges, but then at the same time, what happens to the victim. The law of victims' rights is a wonderful, wonderful aspect to understand. And then you start to see, okay, that's where Christ talks about, love your enemies. How can you do that unless you start to see that the Lord is putting you in positions to be forgiving? And then to understand how Christ's forgiveness by going to the cross for everyone is so important to understand the mind of God and how he thinks and how he deals with these issues. Mm-hmm. And then how we are supposed to reflect back, because as I think David talked about the sun and the moon, God is the sun, we're the moon. We're supposed to reflect back what God is teaching us as well as his love upon it. And then we go to the Abrahamic promise of blessing, which so many don't preach about anymore. It's more geared toward a hereditary tribe, although that's not even true, as we found out. But rather, instead, Abraham's blessing is what we are supposed to be doing and authorized to do to people.
Yeah.
Earth. And
let me ask a question. Does the law have the right to forgive?
The law itself,
or does it give people the right to forgive?
The law gives the right to forgive. The law itself is the law. That's both God as well as man. Man looks at the law as the law. It's like when a police officer pulls you over. Mm-hmm. He's enforcing the law. And you may be going 65 in the 55 zone. He's enforcing the 55 speed limit, even though no one's really following that 55 speed limit. The law is the law. And so, that's why he can write you a ticket saying you're going 10 over the speed limit. The same thing is with God's law, whether it's stealing, whether it's adultery, whether it's killing, the law is the law. And that's the same principle across the board. So
it's really about how to apply the law and to utilize it for the benefit and blessing of mankind.
Right. And we see that in our English common law. You have courts in which we still have, like in Illinois, we still had the court of equity. Equity is that type of forgiveness or the ability to show leniency or greater. It looks at the overall circumstances. Oh, you were speeding to take your wife to the hospital because she's about to deliver a child. That's a reasonable basis to forgive, so you won't get a ticket for that. Or similar things. If a man attacks you, equity. That's why we see Christian. But of course, as the law schools continue, they're trying to drive us away from those roots and go toward what we call the continental model, which flips it. The nice thing about the English jurisprudence that we have in the United States as well is that you're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. If you go into a continental court, it's flipped. You're guilty until proven innocent. So those are kind of the things that you see. So you see that, especially the English and Scots, their development in biblical ideas, especially during the period from Cromwell area, that's where they were trying to reach into and try to be biblical. And so those still remain with us, but they're trying to push those away.
Yeah, the Cromwell era you're talking about is probably the 1640s, 50s.
Right.
Yeah.
That was a period of time when the kings had begun to say that God had made them kings, which is true. But then they became just like many other rulers where they said, I can do anything. And God blesses it, which God does not bless, just as the popes did as well.
Kind of like the Saul problem.
Yeah, they took on power that they weren't allowed to have, or the authority, as you properly coined the term.
Yeah. Well, why don't you introduce your wife? We can see her shoulder on one side, Introduce her.
Sure. This is my wife, Jacqueline.
Hi.
Hello, Jacqueline. Welcome to the Today Show.
Thank you.
The afternoon show.
Right.
Yeah, Jackie and I have been together over 30
Since
years.
1980.
Whoa. Big mistake.
Well, she's the one that can do
It's
addition.
okay. I learned early on that it's not celebration of anniversaries and dates, and men aren't always good at those things, and to just be chill about it, and it's more of what's in the heart and your day-to-day living.
That's
So,
right. It's what counts is what's in between those anniversaries, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Well, I understand that both of you are lawyers, right?
Correct. Correct.
So, Jacqueline, where do you work, if you can say, or is it's not a top secret, is it?
Well, actually, I practiced law for 4 years, back in 91 to 95, and then Robert finished his law school and became an attorney, and he actually started right in with the JAG Corps for the military, and so we had to move. And so I stopped practicing then, and at that point I was almost 30 and knew the clock was ticking and wanted to have a family. And from when I was working, seeing women, teary-eyed and that sort of thing, when they had to leave their little ones at 6 weeks old or go back to work, I vowed that if at all possible, I would try not to be in that position so that I could stay home. And so when we moved down to Georgia, that's what I did. I had a year to kind of start in. I was able for the first time in my life to do Bible studies and take some time off. And then the Lord actually led me to homeschooling. He convicted me that it was my duty, that on no uncertain terms would I turn over what my children would be reading and making those decisions in terms of curriculum and that sort of thing, or the method of their learning, or how they went about doing it. Would I turn it over to someone else? I just didn't have it in me to do that. And I felt I was just convicted it was my responsibility to do this. And it was actually from a little book in the Huntsville, Alabama library that kind of started this all back when my children were 3 and 4 years old. And I have gone back to this day trying to find that little book and cannot find it. I think that the Lord just put it there and it's no longer there.
Oh, that must be the little book in Revelation 10, huh? It must have been incorporated there. So somebody came and stole it.
Right.
It took homeschooling from a Christian perspective.
Yes.
But the downside is, of course, because Jackie is a lawyer, she's taught the children to argue very well. So I'm outnumbered.
Okay.
I don't know if I taught them. I think it's in their gene.
They get it from both ends, huh?
Nevertheless, this family has
5 lawyers.
very great arguments as well as persuasion.
Yeah.
So it's quite fun. Jackie's still an inactive attorney. She could always come back to it, but at this point, we still have one more left.
Yeah, I have
in the
one
nest.
who's 21 and going to college, and then I have another one who's 20. And it was a new experience for me, but decided that he could just go right into the workforce and works for a top tech company and doing amazingly well with no college education at all, which is great. It's incredible, but there's another way.
Right.
And then my little guy who's 13 now, and that's the only one I'm homeschooling right now. So.
I see. Well, we can certainly identify because we did a lot of homeschooling ourselves. We have 6 children, of course. The top 2 were not homeschooled at all. The middle 2 were half and half, and the last 2 were only homeschooled. So we went through this for more than 20 years, and I only had to do it the first year. And then after that, they got oriented, and so my wife took it over, and it was easier for her to do it then. So she was glad to relearn her algebra and math and stuff like that because she always liked that. So she enjoyed the education as much as, better than the kids did, I think. but they did really well too. So anyway, let's move right along here. Robert, why don't you share a little bit about your background and how you got here from there?
Yeah, no, it's just amazing how the Lord has directed us. I mean, my whole life has basically been very similar to Moses in the wilderness, where you have the cloud move you from area to area. I originally grew up in Oklahoma, and my dad was a Minnesotan, and that's why we ended up back in Minnesota after an oil crash in the mid 80s. But the Lord has just, since I was little, I grew up in a Christian home, and it was wonderful to have that, to have yourself surrounded with the Word and people who really desired to do what the Word said. As the Lord promises the third and fourth generation, we go back as Magnusons, back 3, 4, 5, 6 generations. We've really been pretty solid about understanding God and loving God and trying to do the right things. And my uncles, 3 of my 4 uncles were all pastors. My dad was very much into the Word. He usually served in the church until we got kicked out several times. He didn't quite agree with what we were trying to, do what the Lord was telling us to do. So I grew up in that kind of environment. But at the same time, the Lord also just really planted in my heart certain things. And one of the first things I can remember, probably at 5 or 6, I told my parents I'm going to be in the military. Quite confident of it. My dad had served as a draftee for 2 years. But that was the first thing that the Lord just kind of weighed on, that this is what you're going to do. Another thing that occurred when I was in 4th grade, the Lord had me research Germany. And I researched it so well that when I moved into a different neighborhood, I was talking to the kids and they all thought I lived in Germany. So I had read the encyclopedias, I had read everything and knew a few German phrases, although that was always hilarious because usually I speak my German with a Swedish accent because my grandparents were from Sweden. So that always caused some issues. But the Lord was just leading and directing me that, what my life path would be. And then in about 1980, I had decided international relations and law was another portion of it. Of course, you don't understand at that point where it's all going to gel. But the Lord was interesting because he always likes to throw curveballs in. And when I was a senior in high school, I was very active in a lot of things, both sports, student government, speech. And so I was able to gain a nomination into the U.S. Military Academy, which made me really happy because it's like, oh, wow, I guess I'll go to West Point. Well, I had the nomination, and then this colonel calls me and says, Robert, you need to go to the prep school in New Jersey. I said to myself, prep school? That's not right. I don't want to go to prep school. I want to get through in 4 years. And the Lord just, he said, this colonel just told me, no, you need to go to the prep school. We think your math scores are not that great. Well, I was fine. I was in the honors program, but that's not what God really wanted. So this guy told me this, and I found out later when I commissioned as an infantry officer. I was at Fort Benning, and my class was full of West Pointers. And one of my friends comes up to me who had played football at West Point and says, "Are you from Oklahoma?" "Yeah, I'm from Oklahoma." "Well, were you recruited by us, West Point, to come play for us?" "Yeah, I was recruited." "Why did you come?" And I said, "Well, I went to the prep school." And the colonel made me kind of upset because he's like, "Yeah, you need math help." And I was like, "Yeah, I don't think so." He says, "Oh, dummy, that's where all the football players go." So, I mean, it's like, okay, Lord, I'm going to be an officer, but you don't want me to go to West Point? That's kind of odd. So what happened was, at the same time, I was being recruited by this little college in Illinois. And it was hilarious because I was at their high school, a big high school up in Tulsa had this college fair. And I walked up to them, and the school name was Knox. Of course, being a Presbyterian, it's like, hey, I like John Knox. He's quite a man. So I went up and said, hey, what is your school named after John Knox? And the admissions people at the table said, we don't know. It's like, okay. Well, it turned out, yeah, it was a Presbyterian school early in its time. But what happened is that the Lord had the missions director wanted me, the coach, the athletic director wanted me. They put on a big show that came down and talked to my parents. It's Division III school, so it wasn't a scholarship situation, but the Lord led me to this little bitty college. And I was like, well, what's going on? This is the one that ended up deciding, okay, I guess I got to go there.
That's good.
Yeah. So anyway, I show up there, and what's hilarious is that my relatives on my mom's side came from Knox County in Illinois, and they sent a postcard of the exact building in which my dorm was from 1920s. And so it's like, okay, yeah, I think the Lord had a plan for me to go there. And of course, well, why am I going there? Well, they had international relations, they had football. But the truth of the matter is I was sent there because there was this young lady there who was here. And that's my first year, she was a sophomore. So the Lord had that, and then the Lord also had a chance for me to do things there. And then I initially got in because my parents weren't doing so well. Knox was paying all my bills for college tuition and housing. And then my father finally started to do well back in Minneapolis. And all of a sudden I had to take the position I didn't want to go, which is the ROTC, which is Reserve Officer Training Corps. And I got the last 2 years was an Army scholarship. So there I am going into the Army the way I wanted to. So in 1989, I came into the Army, and I was commissioned as an infantry officer. And once again, the Lord is very interesting because the whole point I wanted to do with West Point was get through college as quick as possible and then go in and have the Army help me pay for law school. But with college, I had changed my mind, and I had gotten myself into a couple of law schools my senior year. And I'm telling the person in charge of us, the resource management guy, and I was talking to him, and he says, "Oh, you're branched infantry. You will show up on June 6th for your introduction to infantry officer basic course down at Fort Benning, Georgia." And I said, "Well, what happened to my educational delay? In the Army, you can ask for that, where you can go to become a lawyer, and then you can go on and wait until you go through law school, and then go ahead with your commission, or be going into the Judge Advocate General Court," which was my ultimate goal. So I was like, oh no, I mean, I got this really good school I want to go to. And nope, you better show up. In fact, he was so sure that I was pushing back too hard. He says, "You will report." I was like, I'm not going to not show up. Desertion is not a good thing. So anyway, what was interesting is I called my uncle, who was a lawyer, and he was part of the reason why I became a lawyer. He was both a pastor and a lawyer in Minneapolis, a very large firm in the inner city church. I asked Uncle Roger, and I said, "Roger, what's going on? Here's my situation." He says, "Oh, Robert, in UK they start in October, and that's when I was going to get done, October 1st. And so I called the British consulate, and then I had a chance to choose 4 schools in Scotland and 4 in England. So I picked four schools. Oxford, Cambridge had already closed at that point, because this is in January of 1989. And they closed a little earlier than the English and Scottish other schools. So I put my application in, and I got into Glasgow University in beautiful Glasgow, Scotland, which turned out to have a lot of my family on my mom's side had come from that region. So I show up at infantry school, and the neat thing was we were going through it. My first time, I immediately became the student commander. And my first sergeant was a guy from West Point who's still my great friend. And we went through that, and we basically finished up. And during that time, they wanted me to go on active duty. And I had to say, active duty versus Glasgow law. So I went to Glasgow. And I was a reservist, so I got to spend time 2 years in Glasgow, and then I transferred to DePaul in Chicago, where I got my law degree. And the Lord was just moving me along, and he fortunately, as a reservist, I was fortunate enough that I applied for the JAG internship program, and I got into the Army JAG's Judge Advocate General Office of International and Operation Law because I really loved international law, and I was able to do that. Most ROTC kids didn't get to do that. They usually just took people straight out of law school, but the Lord wanted me to be there. I did a really good job, which helped me then get that position. So then I served in the JAG Corps for 6 years and loved it. I liked being a soldier. I liked taking care of troops as a lawyer, as well as making sure that laws were followed, briefing soldiers on what to do in Bosnia during that period of time. And then the Lord just said, okay, your fun is over. It's like, what? And sure enough, I was in the midst during 9/11, and I had a board that I had to meet as a captain, and I put my packet in, but I couldn't get a picture because 9/11 had just happened, and the gates were all backed up for security reasons. It could take 4 to 6 hours to get on a post. And my office was not on the post, it was off the post.
Where was this now?
This is in Huntsville, Alabama. This is where Jackie learned about homeschooling. And it was frustrating because also at the same time, I had legal responsibilities over programs that were called the Army Space Program Office. And we were starting to make our moves into Afghanistan. And I had to work on these contracts because we wanted to get this material. One of the biggest one was called the Blue Force Tracking System. Blue Force Tracking allowed us to see where our forces were on the ground so that we wouldn't have what's called fratricide, where we'd end up bombing them by accident or hitting them with artillery. We were able to do that in less than a couple of weeks, and that was taking up all my time. Meantime, myself and my colonel had called back to the JAG office at headquarters, which was doing this board, and said, listen, I'm not able to get my picture. Do you think it's okay? And my good friend was sitting in, and he was the one that was in charge of the packets. And he said, yeah, it shouldn't be a problem at all. And so didn't think about it. Board met, got all those things off, and I took some leave and came back. And then my colonel came into my office, shut the door, and that's never a good thing usually. He said, Robert, they decided that they don't want to continue. They decided they had a reduction in force. Here we are in 9/11. We got a reduction in force.
In other words, make it clear.
And so, yeah, and then it was because of my picture. I hadn't submitted an updated picture, so I wasn't chosen to go on to do the major board, which is the next step, which was an ultimate surprise to everybody because everyone that I had dealt with and my old officer evaluation reports were all top notch. Everyone thought I was going to continue, but the Lord said, nope, that's it for active duty. And it was like, okay, it was quite a shock. Of course, you're first going, what in the world's going on? But then God is always humorous by this one thing, a picture was the only thing slowing me up. So it's like, okay, Lord. And the nice thing was that the office formed me a position as a temporary. And so I did that. And then I got a chance to do a little bit of that time. Then I got picked up by NASA for a year. They had created a new position, and then the work didn't totally come out that as much as we wanted. And so I got a result there again of a humorous thing, which is, here's my chief counsel, and he's basically saying, hey, I think you should look at some other positions. So I said, okay. And my old command had a position come out at Kwajalein, Atoll, which is halfway between Hawaii and Australia. And the Lord sent us there.
It's a 2 square mile island in the middle of nowhere in the Pacific Ocean. So
it's a beautiful,
gorgeous. It's like Gilligan's Island. It's literally like Gilligan's Island.
It's a beautiful place. But it's interesting because I wanted really to go back to Huntsville because we had a good church there and we enjoyed the community. But Kwajalein was another place that actually had taken the family out for 4 months before I took the NASA job as a temp because they needed me out there to do the work. So we ended up going back there, but at the same time, I was still in the reserves. And as soon as we arrived in Kwajalein, the Lord said, okay, I brought you out of Louisiana where we were, and I'm bringing you to Kwajalein. And then I'm activated. And my activation is guaranteed that I'm going to Baghdad, Iraq in 2004. So The good news is I wrote the policy for people who were activated out of Kwajalein, which allowed the families to stay out there. And that was before I knew I was going to do that. That was back when I was on active duty. And the result was my family stayed there. It's a very secure area, has everything to look after, and a lot of military families and then contractors who are military. And so off I go to Baghdad, Iraq. So it's one of those things where you're just like, okay, Lord, what are you doing and where are you moving us? Why do you move us there? Oh, okay, my family's safe. Now I got to go to Baghdad. So I went to Baghdad. I met my staff judge advocate there, who's an old friend I knew from the JAG school. And he says, hey, Robert, I got something to tell you. And I said, what's that? He said, I had to activate your whole unit so I could get you. It's like, oh, man, you got to be kidding me.
So they all blamed you, huh?
Yeah, until they probably see this. Oh, but yeah, no, I mean, the whole point was that they wanted a contract fiscal lawyer, and I had that expertise, and they knew that it was very good, so they brought me out and worked 18-hour days. Got to travel a lot. I got to see Babylon, got to see Ur. And it's just incredible to see that in the biblical ways of seeing things and seeing the utter destruction that occurred to Babylon down to the foundations. But when I was there, it was just, once again, the Lord was protecting me. We had a lot of insurgency things going on, and a great story that I'll tell because it's just a beautiful story. My little daughter called me while we were on a phone call from Kwajalein. She says, hey, Daddy, is there any wildlife there in Iraq? And I said, oh, yeah, there's this couple of crazy Saddam ducks. He says, can you get a picture of them for me? Like, oh, sure, I should be able to. Well, they're actually geese because they hissed. Ducks don't hiss, I don't think. At least the Minnesota ducks don't, that I remember. Anyway, so I came out of this meeting, my contract meetings, and I did what I don't usually do is, instead of going straight back to my office, I said, hey, I think I'll get, there they were. So I said, oh, yeah, I'll get a picture from Morgan. And they're just moving around. I'm having a hard time getting a picture of them. It's like frustrating. I'm like, I got to get back to work. But I finally got a good picture. And so I started walking back. And then all of a sudden I heard this rocket engine going over my head. And then it cut off. And it was just a lot of prayers. I hit the ground. And then it all of a sudden exploded. I looked where it exploded right next to my office. Right where I would have probably been, either that area or the front door. So when I got to my office, it was totally, the doors had been blown through with shrapnel all over the front. And then the concussion blast, if I had made it into my office, blew our windows out. So we had glass all over our desks, all the way, including some impaled in the wall. And so, the Lord was looking out for me. He had Morgan specifically say, Dad, can you take a picture? And he had Saddam's ducks do their thing. And the timing, I mean, you just know the Lord is looking after you.
And I might add that I was trying to tell Morgan when she was making that request, oh, Morgan, Dad's so busy. Don't bother him with those kind of requests. And so that really, really taught me to, restrain myself sometimes and just let things happen, because God does all things for good, even little requests from 6-year-olds asking for pictures of ducks. He has purpose in it. And so.
Yeah, some of these delays can be really frustrating, and you have to remind yourself that God is behind them all, especially even in mundane things like being on the highway and getting stuck in traffic, or
right.
Somebody does something stupid or whatever, instead of getting frustrated, we should ask ourselves, what is, perhaps there is a purpose in this that's hidden from us.
Yep.
Who knows? It might even save our lives. We don't know. We don't know if there's some crazy guy down the road that might have hit you or something. We just have no idea.
Right. Mm-hmm. No, and it's the littlest thing. When we were out in Kwajalein, we were able to go to Hawaii. We had a church there, and there was this older Japanese gentleman, and he prayed for parking spots. And at first, you're like, but as an older gentleman, it was really important, but the Lord had always delivered it for him. And that just shows you that, the totality of how we're supposed to look at what God can do. It's nothing is too little for him. Nothing is too small. Nothing is too great for what he can do for us. So anyway, it was Iraq was interesting. We did 18-hour days. I got to deal with lots and lots of things. It was just the Lord had me move into operations and other things that were just amazing. But part of it was being 18 hours a day, and also my travel back and forth between, I was out at the airport, which we called Bayat, Baghdad International Airport, and then I was at Camp Victory. We go on Route Irish into the Green Zone. During that time, I had to wear basically about a 40-pound armored vest. Had several inches thick Kevlar, and so I had to put that on. I also had to wear it when I took helicopter rides or wherever we go. We had to put that on. Sometimes we had to wear it when we knew the insurgents were probably going to strike at us.
And Robert's 6'5", so this vest was made for someone who's 5'10", probably to 6 foot. And so it hit him in the wrong spot in the back.
Yeah, so what happened was when I was at Fort Hood, they said, we got this extra large vest, but it's not the long, which I had before. I was also at Fort Hood, and I had a kit which had an extra long vest, but they didn't have any. Of course, silly me is like, no, I don't want to sit back here and wait to get into Iraq. I'm needed there, so I better get this on and get it over with. So I took it. So when I was finally leaving, I just there was two things that were not quite right, and I had the military, put it in my files, was I had a slight backache, and I was tired. Exhausted, basically. Of course, when you do 18-hour days for, 12 months, you're going to be, and temperatures plus also getting hit with, indirect fire, which is basically from mortars and rockets. Yeah, you get a little bit going on there. But anyway, I came out, I felt like I would be okay. And I just put it down and put those two things down, and as Monty Python's sketch of the Black Knight, it's just but a scratch. I didn't feel like anything major about it, just that the back didn't quite feel right, etc. So we'll get to it a little bit later. I get back to Kwajalein, and I love the island. I'm enjoying it. And the Lord just said, it's going to be time to move again soon. And then he hit me with an illness. I had a respiratory issue. I had to get to medevac to Hawaii. But during that time, I had applied for a job because it popped open in Germany with the largest defense agency in the Department of Defense. And I said, I got Wiesbaden, Germany is somewhere I really wanted the family to see. And so I applied for it, but I thought, there's no way I'm going to get it. Most of the Department of Defense lawyers are Ivy League, and I'm not an Ivy League guy. So I got this call, and it said, hey, we're going to interview you. Well, I had a temperature, what was that day?
100 and something.
102, 103 degree temperature. I'm feeling lousy, but I did the interview anyway. And I'm talking to the guy and explaining my background and everything. And then I got off the phone, and Jackie normally would do this. She comes and says to me, how'd it go? I said, I don't remember a thing. So all of a sudden it got worse. And so that's when I got medevaced. So I'm in Honolulu. They're giving me treatments there in Honolulu at the civilian hospital. And all of a sudden I get a call from my office in Kwajalein saying you need to call back to Lorton, Virginia, where the agency is located. They want you to interview in person. And I said, and I was just getting better. So it was like, okay, I just medevaced. I don't have my suit. I don't have anything.
And Hawaii is a 5-hour flight from Kwajalein. So basically he had to fly back to Kwajalein, get his suit, get back on the same plane. And the planes only come twice a week. So anyway, get on the same plane and get back to Hawaii, and then catch a flight to the mainland with his suit. During this time.
And then fly from there all the way to Washington, D.C., which of course is a 7 or 8 hour flight. So I get there, I get the interview, and I'm the best guy, and they select me. So pack up the family. While we're packing up the family, the Lord decides to bless us with child number 3. So we are all the way from Kwajalein.
I was 8 months pregnant, so I had a decision: have the baby in Honolulu or have the baby in Germany. And I went with Germany because I thought, the germs and everything of traveling with a newborn would be better if he was in my stomach. So anyway.
So we flew all the way to Germany, and that's where I was basically for 8.5 years, almost 9 years during that time. And the Lord just blessed me over and over, and I was coming up with things, legal theories that people hadn't thought of. The Lord just constantly was helping me, and I was building up this career, and I was well known there. I was able to do speaking engagements with European partners. It was just a lot of fun. And then finally, of course, my leadership were very happy with me, but they wanted me to get promoted. So they said, it's time to come home. And of course, that's never a thing that you want to hear when you really enjoy Europe, is to come home. And of course, the worst part is come home to Washington, D.C., which is not, for me, it wasn't the area that I really wanted. My parents got married there, and as a young boy, I loved Washington, D.C., but it started to get more and more powerful, and the people began to, in my opinion, so many of them were just so much up on themselves. The pride was too much, and I just didn't want that kind of atmosphere. So I was trying my best, Lord, let me go here, let me go there. And He'd give me interviews, but people were saying no. So it was like He was just funneling me right down to go back to headquarters. And the job they had sounded pretty good, and I was very happy. But I show up, and the Lord had some conflicts going on, and it was frustrating me. And then at the same time, the Lord also, because the capability of my thoughts wasn't gathering like it usually did, and I didn't know what was going on, but my health was slipping.
And they
slowly
put him
but
in
surely.
His office had a desk. Here he's 6'5", big football player type guy. And his desk, when I went in there the first time, literally was too small for me. I mean, the position of it, the desk was just like too low. His chair was not supportive. And apparently it took like 9 months or something to go through the system to make all the requests for all the ergonomical stuff. And he didn't have that time anyway. So he was just working in a bad position.
Yeah. And the Lord was using the leadership. And that's what was great about when I started reading your things, because it helped me focus not to get upset at my leadership, because they weren't figuring out what was going on. I didn't know what was going on, but the Lord was using them because He wanted me to get out of the government. And of course, that wasn't what I wanted. I wanted to stay in because it was very nice. I enjoyed it. But God was saying, no, you got to move. And then there were some promises made and other things. And one day I was walking at Christmas time. Actually, it was interesting because I walked out of my office right before Christmas, and I told one of my office mates, I said, I won't be back. I just have this feeling I won't be back. And he's like, what? I don't know. It's just the feeling I have. And right after Christmas that weekend, I was walking with my family, and I sat down on a bench, and I couldn't get up. My back had slipped. Finally, the disc that was damaged right where the vest ended, the load was too much on it. It finally decided, okay, it's time. And then from then on, the Lord just hammered me. I mean, it was very difficult. I was having problems, and then all of a sudden, my Jackie was next to me one evening, and I was just waking up exhausted again. And I had a back issue, and my exhaustion was just hitting me. And my wife Jackie says to me, Robert, you're not breathing. I said, what? You're not breathing. I said, uh-oh. We looked it up, and that's sleep apnea. And that's what took my father in 2002, was sleep apnea. So she fortunately understood what was going on. My mom didn't understand. And my dad had it for a while, which of course apnea is quite common, especially among athletes and bigger people. So we went into the sleep study. So the Lord helped me there. Finally figured that out, and then I had to work from home. And my office was very kind, let me work for almost 18 months while I was going through all these health crises. And I'd go up, and then I'd go down, and then I'd go up and go down. And finally,
and that's working laying down and taking your meals on your stomach. So he's not giving you all the details, but it was, he's trying to get through it. But.
So anyway, the Lord finally said, okay, now is your decision point. And my boss, very good man, very kind to me overall, said, Robert, I can't do it anymore. Can't let you telework. I was just beside myself. What's going to happen? Well, the good news is I didn't know it at the time, but I started looking, and I had exactly the amount of time I needed to retire. And I had exactly the right time, and they were restructuring the office, so I would help them with a position by retiring. So I took early retirement. And I didn't want to do that, but there was nothing I could do. I just knew I wasn't ready yet. I needed a couple more months. It probably would have been 24 months total. But the Lord just said, nope, you're done. And so I retired. But the interesting thing is, during that period of time, all of a sudden this guy from Sweden messaged me and said, hey, would you like to help me out? I want to do things for Scandinavian companies that want to do business with the government. Like, okay. Entrepreneur. Well, that's not really me, but that's what the Lord wanted. So that's what I'm doing right now. I have a small consultancy firm, and the Lord is just leading me along. So this cloud, and I mentioned it in my retirement ceremony, and my friends that were with me in Germany came, and they were just like, Robert, that's so apropos how the Lord does lead us by cloud. I mean, he moves the cloud. He says, up, and here you go. And you just have to go. And sometimes you're fighting it, but it's worthless because it's going to happen. I mean, I tried my best with the rehabilitation. I was trying hard to get in the office, and I couldn't sit. So that's where I'm at on that side. But the government gave me a great opportunity to just see so much. And so now I'm hopefully useful to my clients, and the Lord just brings them in. And it's just right now, it's my favorite story as a young man was George Mueller. I don't know if many people know, but at least within my circle of friends, it was always great. He was an orphanage in England. He was originally from Germany. And the Lord told him not to go get money. He was told to pray for it. And he'd pray, and sometimes he'd get right down where he's like, oh, the children are going to starve. And then the next day or two, a man or woman would show up with 100 pounds, which was a lot of money, and all of a sudden, boom, he was able to take care of things. He was a man of great faith, and that's where I'm right now. Is the Lord just brings the clients in, and it's like, okay,
just at the right time, and usually right at the last minute.
Yeah,
I understand that too. I remember we were reading about George Mueller back in grade school, and I remember the story of how they were out of food. Well, they were out of milk specifically, and then the milk truck broke down right in front of their house. And rather than have all the milk spoil, they brought it in and gave it to the orphanage. I remember those interesting stories because those things, stories like that, kind of go with you throughout your life and make you realize the possibilities, so that when you yourself go through this kind of stuff, you pray, and then you see the same kind of move of God, and the answers, and it's quite gratifying, because then you know that God took time out of his busy schedule to touch you personally, and there's nothing like that in the world.
And I notice that the Lord seems to give you the tools earlier than you think, like those stories, and just be able to take it and grasp the faith of what was going on, just as you had to grasp Abraham's faith. I mean, you're going to have more children than this, but Sarah is of an age where she had dried up and no longer was supposed to have children, but God is able to do these things. And so having those tools and seeing it in Scripture, it gives you the ability to wrap your mind around what is happening to me and why is it happening. You don't know necessarily, but you do know that the Lord always provides. And then, I mean, it's always looking backwards that you see, oh, wow, I went this way for this purpose. I went taking pictures of geese instead of going directly to my office for that purpose. I mean, it's just throughout. And the blessing of the Lord, allowing you to be able to see that and see his hand. His hand is constantly there. His sovereignty is there. The whole purpose for us meeting you and being able to see, the writings and some of the other things that are going on, being able to see what the Lord reveals to other people, and then being able to see how God is using that toward the ultimate purpose. It takes away all these issues that we see. I mean, politically, my family's always been political. And, right now is just so chaotic, but it's so peaceful because you really get the sovereignty. Trump was elected because God wanted him to be president. Obama was elected because God wanted to be president. Bush was elected. Once you get that in your head, you lose all the animosity and everything else, or the feeling that this isn't right. You just know this is what God is doing. And then the question is, what is God going to do with these leaders? What is he going to do with the people? How are they going to react? And, where is he taking us? I mean, there's just amazing things. And then when you step back and you start to see the spiritual realm, these battles that you and others are very active in, and then the prayers from us who aren't necessarily in that battle, but standing back, to focus in and know this is what God is doing and that he's headed in the right direction. That's the thing that's for us, because there's a veil. The veil, I think, is before a lot of our eyes. We don't quite see where God is taking us, but the end point is his glory. And it's going to be done, and it's going to be done right. And we don't need to fear all that's out there.
Yeah. Well, we've got about 8 or 9 minutes left before we hit the top of the hour here. Why don't we hear from Jacqueline? Well, what is a little bit about your background, if you can, whatever you can say.
Well, I'm totally opposite from Robert in the sense that I grew up with an Iranian father, watching my grandmother. He's secular for the most part now, though I don't want to characterize anything, but I grew up watching my grandmother pray 5 times a day to Mecca. And my mom was a devout Catholic. She had 11 brothers and sisters, and she, to the point that she was going to mass every day, and had altars and everything set up in their home and everything. The Lord has opened her eyes now after much prayer, after many years. But it started out that way. My parents met in Illinois. And when my dad was going to the civil engineering school at the University of Illinois, and we then ended up moving to Iran when I was between the age of 4 and 7, and I remember a lot from back then. And then one time when my dad was on a business trip, my mom, prior to that, apparently had determined that my sister, her, and I needed to leave the country, and so we left. And my dad then himself ended up leaving much later on, but before the revolution.
No, after for him.
Oh, after.
He left after the revolution, okay. But you left before. Okay. The Lord was looking out for you on that.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I basically came back to the States with my mom, and it was my mom did everything from working for a newspaper, worked in the Sears Tower, and actually then started her own little community paper. And I, like you, learned how to typeset on a typesetter at 15 years old, and delivered newspapers, little community newspapers at 3 o'clock in the morning in the snow, because my mom was a go-getter, and that they had printed, and that was the best time to get them out. So my sister and I would go from house to house in the dark on the weekends delivering newspapers. And then we went to try to sell ads too. That was always fun because no one wanted to buy an ad, because our little paper would be going up against the big guys in town, and they didn't want to support that. So anyway, bottom line is, though, all of this experience from living in Iran and being out away from the States, and then the hard times with my mom, ended up creating in me a craving for financial security and emotional stability. And so I went to college, went to Knox, where I met Robert, and I went on to law school, and then ended up practicing for 4 years. Though the Lord made that time of practicing, it wasn't all it was chalked up to be. It was very challenging. I didn't really enjoy what I was doing. I used those times going back and forth to work basically sobbing, crying, asking the Lord just to help. And I was a very baby Christian at that point. So then he opened everything up with Robert. We moved down to Georgia, where he started as a JAG. And that's when I I remember distinctly being pregnant with my first one and crying out to the Lord. I had just started Bible study classes because I was raised Catholic, and I didn't know all of the characters and stories. And I remember just sobbing and saying, Lord, here I am, a lawyer. I can't even remember all these different characters. I can't remember all the different stories. And sorry, but I desperately want to raise my children for you. How can I if I can't even remember the stories myself? And needless to say, 21 years later, where we are today, he has gone above and beyond answering that prayer in ways that I couldn't even have dreamed of, because he's gone so above and beyond. And I'm so grateful for him doing that. Anyway, moving along. Then it was after that, then when my oldest Morgan was 4 or 5 years old, that I found that book in the Huntsville Library convicting me to homeschool. And that's when I knew that that was my calling. You know, it had been my idea, my flesh's idea, to seek the security by going to law school and thinking everything's going to be hunky-dory for the rest of my life financially because, hey, I'm a lawyer, and hey, I married a lawyer too, right? So I'm covered and everything will be okay. Well, the Lord had other ideas. And he basically, the way that I can sum it up best is that my younger years, he created this craving and need for the financial security and emotional stability. In my middle years, he totally answered it and gave it to me beyond my wildest dreams, because not only was I homeschooling, but I homeschooled for almost 10 years in Europe, where we did not do the traditional work out of textbooks. We went to museums. My daughter's curriculum came from the gift shops of all of the museums and, sites, World War II sites, and all sorts of things, all through France, Germany. One of her, when she applied to the public Ivy that she's going to right now, when she applied, I had to draw up the curriculum. One of the courses was something like 21 countries, a course study in, I don't remember how I titled it, but the point is that we spent 2 weeks here, 2 weeks there, and we would actually, instead of staying in a hotel, rent a home or a small apartment and shop at the grocery store, meet the locals, live the life, so that she was really exposed to all of that. And so were my two boys. And it just became a part of who they are, and they so much appreciate other cultures and the foods and the people and all of that. And to be able to do that, and to have the money to do that. And then, of course, the government was paying for our housing, and we lived in beautiful homes. It was just my point is that he gave me what I wanted above and beyond, but for a reason, because he was then going to take it all away. So he gave me the craving, then he satisfied it all, but then he took it away, everything. But basically he took it all away, and then even gave me issues so that even if I wanted to go back and practice or even go do something else, I couldn't. So all I could do was just sit there in my situation and stew in it, or deal with it, or learn to become comfortable in it, or analyze it, which I tended to do a lot, and read your works and to learn. And so he has literally brought me full circle, where he taught me that my security was going to come from him and him alone. And to understand that I truly now understand what it means that he does all things for good. Because when things, when the money wasn't there or things weren't happening, if I just hung on to that and didn't try to understand why things were happening, literally in the last 4 years while we've been going through the crux of his health issues, we have had to move every year. This is 13,000 pounds, having a husband who can't lift anything, a son who went through his own back issue. Literally, I was the only one trying to move 13,000 pounds 4 times, and sometimes with the last time with only 2 weeks notice. And and it was interesting. Well, I'll skip that. But anyway, but now he's taught me one last lesson, which I just absolutely love, and it came from your writing too. And what I learned was that, in the past I've always said, okay, the Lord will provide. The Lord will provide, and just hung on to that. But as I understand it, that comes from the law. That's in the Bible, and that's what all of his promises about provision and the sparrows, and all of that, and the grass and all flowers and all of that. How much more will I do for you if I do that for them? Okay, but I learned that showing my ultimate love for him and my ultimate trust would be to not hold him to those promises. To essentially, though this isn't technically correct, well, maybe it is, to essentially give him the freedom, though God, as we know, has full freedom to do whatever he wants, but to give him the freedom to choose not to provide. In other words, if he felt best that I actually were not provided, that I was going to starve, so be it. So be it, because I want to be at one, my mind with his mind, and if that's what he wants, then okay.
Yeah, it's interesting that what you're saying here is that you wanted your relationship with him not to be based upon his provisions or even his promises. I mean, yes, we have faith in his promises as New Covenant believers, but at the same time, it doesn't really define our organic relationship with him. So whether, it's a little bit like Job, whether we live or die, he's still God, and we will still follow him.
Right, and so it was to be able to let go even at that, and I almost found that things started happening when I even let go at that level. Things started moving along with him, gave us a little more revelation on things we could do for his health, things came in for his business, stuff like that. But just to really, someone in the last conference said, go with the flow. And I know that's such a cliche thing, but really there's so much truth in just going with the flow. Going into every day, every moment with no preconceived ideas of how you want it to turn out, what you want to happen, just like you said, running into a traffic jam, whatever, there's a reason. There's a reason. Someone cuts you off, whatever, there's a reason. It's all either an opportunity to practice love, and just that, and the overarching theme of love, is just a huge lesson that he's taught us. So
yeah, and that brings us into a life of peace as well. When we try to react, you'd understand this. I assume that when you were coming into these conclusions, that you decided not to legislate your problems away. In other words, demand of God through legislation.
Oh no! So far be it from me to no, because I don't. Yeah, I mean, for everything he's done, how could I? I just demand. It's just not my place. It's not my. Maybe it all went back to learning little lessons, like keeping my mouth shut when Morgan is asking for a picture of the birds, and and just being a little more restrained. than maybe my personality would normally want to be. Just restraining myself. Yeah, but no, I would, like I said, I'd rather not be fed than demand anything of God. But also understanding that He does do all things for good. So even if it's something negative that's happening to me, there's something good is going to come of it. Maybe I won't see it today, but at some point,
That's really the life of faith, where you know that all things work together for good, and so even if things look like they are bad temporarily, you know that in the end, in order for God to train us and bring us to the place where we are like Christ, we have to go through adversity too. That's part of life, and that's part of what makes us who we are. So that's really a very important thing.
And you also mentioned that that's synonymous with having one mind with Him. You're talking about this new theme of unity. And the next step is training us to have one mind with Him. Well, if we're constantly, thinking, well, we want something else or going in the other direction, then we're not going to have one mind. But giving Him the freedom to even not provide means, He's leading and I'm following, even when it's detrimental to my flesh, So.
Yeah. Many times I've, especially in the past years when we were going through difficult times back in the 80s and even in the early 90s, and quite literally seeing God's provision at the last minute, 11th hour, 11th, 59th minute, that kind of thing. Some things were just absolutely incredible. But the one thing I learned back then was go with the flow and understand that whether you pray for God's provision or not, He provides anyway. He does things anyway because we are His children. And if He provides for the sparrows who don't pray at all, because He's responsible for them and He loves them, how much more does He provide for us as well? And I've found that even when I didn't ask, He was still providing. Usually, I've found that when we pray to Him, first of all, He already knows what we're going to pray. He already knows what we need. He already knows all these things. The purpose of prayer is really more for our benefit than for His. Because it helps us clarify things. It helps us to solidify things and work through things. Because prayer is often an act of processing. We're processing life. And, we're not really telling Him all the things He's forgotten. And He already knows the needs. And so, and a lot of times when we were praying, the answer was already on the way. For instance, already in the mail, as it were, and we'd get it the same day or the next day, but it was mailed before we even prayed. These are very little details of life that really have gone into training me and giving me an understanding of who He is, His character, His plan, and how we relate to Him. So this is all very good. By the way, I talked about unity at the Pentecost conference. I had two teachings, just so that people understand. I had the first one on the word peace and the second on unity, closely related. But anyway, Robert, do you have anything final that you want to conclude this with?
I think it's interesting when you go through the trials, because you always hear preached, you need to pick up your cross and follow me. But it really doesn't occur until you actually get through that crucible of fire, because that's what God is doing. He's taking us, just as you do when you're in the military. You're trained and you keep getting pushed further and further. As an infantry guy, they pushed us 16-mile road marches, through rain, through thunderstorms. How did I react? Becomes muscle memory, as they call it, in the physical body. The same thing is spiritually. And to know that you're going to go through that fire, which is what God is doing, especially when you know he does that to make you pure. And he's going to use that. And he says, I'm going to use it for these purposes. And that's just the greatest comfort of all, is knowing that God is doing. And that, he's going to use you. And by going through these, it really helps you go into the Sermon on the Mount, how to be meek, how to be humble, how to look, how to forgive. Because then all of a sudden you say, oh, these people are in trouble too. Oh, I didn't know that. That really hurts when you have an illness. Or this really hurts when you're financially in a tough position. You're able to then witness, allowing the Spirit to work through you, to witness even more, to allow the Holy Spirit to operate when you witness. And so that's the beautiful thing. And the Lord gives us things just when. And it was just great that we had your writings, that the Lord was kind enough for you to explain and actually have you document what you went through in the 80s and 90s in Arkansas and New Mexico and the other areas. So it's like, yes, he went through it. I got it. Okay. Yeah, there's days when you're just like, Lord, what are you doing to me? Why are you doing this to me?
Like you said about the dog, I wouldn't treat my dog like this.
I mean, there's days where it is, but at the same time, it's the same thing as a soldier. You're going through this training because someday you're going to be put into a position where you have to fall back upon what you have. Well, the Lord is doing that so that we have a fallback. And like Jackie said, it's so crucial to understand is that God's foreknowledge is there. Like you were saying, his foreknowledge is, he knows all. He knows exactly the time, date that we're going to talk. He knows exactly what's going to come out of my mouth and your mouth and Jackie's mouth. He knows that. But he uses all that into this huge grand plan. And then the end of it all, we know that God is going to show both the justice, but also his mercy. And that is the most incredible thing of all, is to understand that merciful action that's going to come up at the end of the judgment period. For people, that's why they're going to fall down. They're going to see the beautifulness of God, and that he has a plan even for those who didn't understand that plan during their time, because God was using them. Esau have I hated. I love how you put that. It's just a great example of what the Lord can do. Yes, I may hate you in this life, but I have a plan for you in the next life that is a plan that will restore all things, which is just incredibly lifting to see that God has that power and that capability of doing so, and how man has used all his little thoughts and tried to pull us farther and further away from what the true plan is, so that we're blind in this age, as were the Jews blind when Christ first came. It appears to me they're blind right now, as we're on the cusp of Christ coming back the second time. Once again, man has come up with all these crazy ideas. They're so far from what truth is, yet it's there in Scripture.
God's plan, but it was God's plan for them to do this on top of it.
Oh, yeah.
I know you know.
Yeah. So that's the beautiful thing about it, is that that there is a creator. The creator has laid out the plan for us. He's laid out the law. He's laid out the 3 ceremonies. He shows how this interaction occurs and what does it mean and how does it play. And so that's just the beautifulnul of it, because you start to see, sorry I'm talking a little too long here, but the left hand and the right hand paths, which are man's paths, one is total liberalness. I don't have to do anything. I can be, eat, drink, and be merry, versus the other side of the right-hand path, where the people are so judgmental that they don't understand God's law and they have no mercy. And the Lord tells us that straight is the gate and narrow is the way. And it is, because it's not either of those paths, which are man saying, God's allowing them the authority to go in rebellion, both sides, rather than follow the path in which he teaches. And that's the beautiful thing. Once God has allowed the Spirit enters you and you understand that, then you have that confidence that no matter what, I know I'm on the right path. And I know that I'm following what the Lord wants me to follow, and that I'm actually shedding all this garbage and thoughts that people have taught me over a period. And I know, stick to what the Lord's word is, stick to what the Lord's directing. what does the Lord say to me? Where am I going? How am I going? And just follow and see where the journey, takes you in this life. But once you pierce that veil of death, or the resurrection comes, then you will, or the quickening for us who may be alive at that period is just, let the Lord do what he needs to. Is true obedience. Let the Lord do what he has, and you surrender.
Yeah, through all the difficulties in the past, probably the one lesson, one of the most important lessons that I came out through that with, is that I learned to forgive God. Now, God didn't sin, but we do feel like we are mistreated, okay? It seems in our human perspective that God is involved in child abuse, namely us. But when we look at Jesus Christ, the Son of God, on the cross, we can understand that the greatest evil was also the greatest good. And so we only experience a tiny, tiny part of what he went through. And yet we are often incapable of handling even that. And we often get mad at God. And I've often said half the world is mad at God and the rest of them don't even know him. So, but it's all about learning to have faith in him and understand that it will work out for good. Because without understanding Romans 8:28, we're never going to be able to forgive God, and we'll just remain bitter at him and angry with him for what he has apparently done with us in our lives. But in the end, once we pass through it, once we get through it on the other side, and we understand, we can look back on it and understand things, then it becomes, understanding makes it much easier to forgive him for all of his trespasses against us, if I can say it that way. Well, anyway, I guess that's about it. We better close this off, and so we sure appreciate your testimonies, both of you. And you're living in Virginia now?
Correct. For now.
So, yeah, for now. Until the next move.
Tomorrow, who knows at the end of when the lease is over this year, what's going to happen.
Okay, and the next time you move, you'll forgive God for it, right?
Well, like I said, I learned that lesson, so I don't even hold it against him now. So, but that's thanks to you and your writing, and I'm trying to remember which book that is in case people want to learn more about that forgiveness of God. And it's, for some reason, I'm drawing a blank. And can you?
You might be talking about The Wars of the Lord, which is kind of my story.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's yes.
Okay, well, it's been great. Thank you very much. And we'll close this off for now, and hopefully we'll see you at the next conference, huh?
Lord willing. We look forward to it.
Okay.
Thank you.